Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yamin of Revolution, the C.I.A. chief, flies, flees, runs, scrams, whatever you want to say, to Russia, to ask, to beg, to plead for mercy from Putin. Before we get into that, y'all be sure to wipe y'all feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, it's all falling apart for the white supremacists who run this country.
A U.S. Air Force Boeing C-17 Globemaster III transport aircraft landed earlier today, August 25th, at Vnukovo Airport in Moscow, arriving from Latvia. Public flight data identifies the aircraft as registration number C17ARCH 4555 077181, which arrived in Riga on August 23rd, after departing from Andrews Air Force Base near Washington. Its previous point of departure was recorded as Camp Springs, Maryland, which is home to Joint Base Andrews, the USAF's primary VIP and strategic transportation hub just outside Washington, D.C., associated with presidential air transportation including Air Force One. The purpose of the visit remains unknown, marking a rare military arrival amid rising tensions, but it is speculated that the purpose of this visit may be an upcoming prisoner exchange. This is the first publicly recorded arrival of a U.S. Air Force C-17 aircraft in Russia since May 2020, when a similar aircraft delivered ventilators during the COVID-19 pandemic. The U.S. and Russian officials have not disclosed the purpose of the flight. The Kremlin stated that it had no information about the aircraft's arrival. A U.S. diplomatic convoy was spotted on a Moscow highway heading the Kremlin. This movement occurred shortly after the arrival of the U.S. aircraft, sparking speculation about a possible unannounced diplomatic mission.
Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, August 25th, 2026, and our dear friend Larry Johnson is here with us. Welcome back, Larry, with that beautiful shirt you put on. You just smashed everything here on the scene.
You're competing well yourself, my friend. It's not a competition. It's just an expression of style.
Yeah. Beautiful, by the way. Larry, let me start with a simple and basic question. What is happening in this world today? And what has happened so far? It's so crazy, everything that we're looking at. And, the case of Iran, the case of Russia, I don't know where to start. Let's start with the two meetings. Sim Munir going to Iran, then Omanian foreign minister going to Iran. And you see the head of Iranian parliament mocking Scott Bessent mocking the head of Iranian parliament. What's going on?
Well, I wrote the piece last night that I told you about. That here's Bessent not announcing economic D-Day, and the expression on his face when one of the reporters said, "Hey, D-Day, there was actual troops being landed. There was actual fighting on the beaches. How does what you're talking about equate with D-Day? Because you're not talking about actually doing anything right now. You're making threats about what you might do in the future." And Besant for a moment, he had like a deer in the headlight look. I don't know if you got that video.
Mm. The video in which Scott Besson is talking about, I'm not going to blow up.
But yeah, I mean, it was in, but he was trying to justify how this was sort of like D-Day, but not really like D-Day. I mean, it's like, really?
What did you learn from, what is your understanding of the Sim Munir going to Iran? Yeah, last night we didn't have that much information. Today, it seems that new information came in. Based on the new, information, what is your assessment? What is your understanding of what is happening?
Well, why don't you first tell me what has been reported in Iranian channel? I haven't seen all the Iranian channels. I think you have. What are they saying in Iran about what happened?
Yeah, they said that we told Sim Munir as Iranians. Iranians are talking about that Iran said to Sim Munir that they're not going to trust the United States. There is no trust there. And there, if you want to get back to the MOU, you have to consider all those preconditions that were mentioned before. Before getting to any sort of talk, it's not going to be, if you want to get back to the talks, it's not going to be, overnight. You have to show that you're serious about what you're talking about. So you have to, first of all, consider all those preconditions, then talking about MOU, and the MOU has changed since then. And it's MOU today is Yemen, is Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, and Palestine. This is what I've heard from Iranian media.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing is that Munir also presented Iran with the invite to join the Mecca deal. I don't know if I don't think any final decision's been made on that. I was told he was also going to talk about expanding trade relations with Iran, increasing $10 billion over 3 years. And was also supposed to talk about a bilateral security agreement. Now, he was there carrying a message from Trump as well, trying to get Iran. Okay, let's what's it going to take to get you back and negotiate to talk to the United States? And as you correctly noted, Iran saying MOU's on the table. U.S. has to fulfill what it's signed on to. It is that framework still stands. But and I think I wouldn't be surprised that after Munir spoke with Iran and returned to Pakistan, they probably gave Trump a call and said, "Okay, yeah, here's what Iran's saying." I don't think Iran's in a mood to make any kind of concessions. Now, they are. I've seen one report claiming that the Iranians have now made the decision to enrich up to 90%. No confirmation of that. But, if that report is true, and then we have to wait and see if Iran follows through on the threat it made as well about withdrawing from the NPT. So if they withdraw from the NPT and then boost enrichment to 90%, they're sending the West a clear message. We're going to build a nuke.
But when it comes to, you know, the Iranian message to the United States, do you think that has anything changed so far? Because it's so important to consider what it was before the MOU, all those paragraphs in the MOU. What has changed since then? And because Iranian side said the meeting was productive. I don't know what does that mean. Productive in what sense?
Well, they got, you know, they expressed Iran's view to Pakistan. Pakistan said, okay, we'll make sure that message gets delivered to Washington. Yeah, and there's, as you said, there's a lot going on right now, sort of behind the scenes. I think, you know, because the story that's not out there is that the United States it's got a real problem with diesel. It's not the price of gasoline. It's the physical price of diesel. If you look out on the West Coast, what's called, you know, the PAD, I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's basically deals with diesel production. There are 5 PAD areas. PAD 1 is basically the east coast of the United States from Maine down to Florida. PAD 2 is the Midwest, you know, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, Ohio, Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, Michigan, everything that's in that contained, that's PAD 2. PAD 3 is the Gulf Coast. PAD 4 is the Rocky Mountain area, and PAD 5 is the West Coast, including Alaska. In the West Coast, diesel is now $6 and $46.40 a gallon. Woo! It's basically, it's gone up about $2.20 a gallon. In the Midwest, you know, everything has gone up. Probably the cheapest is down in the area where I live in Florida, and that's at $5.52, $5.48. So you compare that to in February, you know, the price was down around $3. So it's gone up $2. So that's hitting all truckers, all tractors, and it's going to hit the fuel oil. You know, all those homes on the East Coast, with winter coming, they're going to have to be heated with fuel oil. So the diesel crisis is real. Canada, and there's some confusion here because the Canadian, one of the Canadian producers who's been shipping 300,000 barrels per day of oil to the United States, Rystad Energy, it's saying, well, we've got planned maintenance. So there's 300,000 barrels a day that are going to be offline starting next Tuesday, September 1st. And so there's no way the United States can make that up. So right there's going to be 300,000 barrels a day.
Yeah. It's the problem with Canada. It's all about Donald Trump and his arrogance, and it's unbelievable what's going on. But with the case of the Strait of Hormuz, how is that going to facilitate in a short run to help the United States, if that's the case?
Say that again?
Because they want to open up the Strait of Hormuz, because today Donald Trump posted that there is no mine in the Strait of Hormuz. They just removed all the mines there, and there is nothing. If Iran decides to put them back again, we're going to hit them. We're going to destroy them. This is
that's ridiculous. How do they get them out? There hasn't been a U.S. minesweeper there. To my knowledge, there hasn't been any NATO minesweeper there. So it may be that Iran actually never really planted mines.
Then opening up the Strait of Hormuz would take time, in your opinion, with what's going on right now?
Oh, come on, Nima. Don't you? Why are you not listening to Donald Trump? The Strait of Hormuz is wide open. I mean, traffic's flowing through right and left.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe it's not. This is one of those situations in which you've got the United States engaged with confabulation. It may actually really, really believe that the Strait of Hormuz is open, but just believing that doesn't make it so. In fact, I haven't checked the vesselfinder.com yet today, but there are just a few ships. Nothing. There's one ship I see. It's called an auxiliary ship that's in the Omani Channel, but other than that, nothing is showing up on AIS. And there's only very few ships going through the Iranian side. So, traffic through the Strait of Hormuz is still basically shut down.
I assume that Donald Trump or the United States is behind the visit of the Omani foreign minister to Iran. He went to Iran to talk with Iranians. They say that they want to open up the Strait of Hormuz as soon as possible. It was mentioned.
Once the U.S. blockade is lifted.
Yeah.
So that's the condition. So we'll see if Trump agrees to that. But they did also say that Oman and Iran have reached an agreement on how maritime traffic will be handled in the Strait of Hormuz. Any ship that wants to come in going to have to pay a fee to Iran. I'm sure they'll split it with Oman. And then once they're in, they load up and go out with whatever. And so at that point, Iran's going to control the entrance, what comes in. And then after that, if they want to go out through the Omani Channel, they can go out through the Omani Channel. Not going to matter. But they ain't coming in through the Omani Channel. If they try, they'll be sunk.
The foreign minister of Oman today said that future management of this strait and a permanent solution would be addressed later under Article 5 of the MOU. It means that the MOU is discussed seriously between, when he's...
Go ahead.
Yeah, when he's talking this way, it means that it's all based on the MOU. And they're trying to... Because under MOU, Article 5 basically was about the Strait of Hormuz. In the first 30 days of those 60 days, they had to define the new mechanism. Right now, they have defined that mechanism, and it's going to be introduced into the MOU. And do you see the possibility of getting back to the MOU at this particular moment, or we're still far away from that moment?
Well, it's up to the United States. Look, Iran's laid out its position. You want to get a deal? Fulfill the MOU. Now you declared it dead. We still say it's alive. So you have to accept it, and we'll see. We'll see if you go along with it.
The Omani government said that they're planning to hold discussions with regional partners to promote peace, cooperation, stability, and freedom of navigation. And all these GCC countries, it seems they have opposed Donald Trump's decision with the economic outcast, whatever that is, economic warfare, except UAE. And this was a negative sign for Donald Trump to start with. And on the other hand, they're talking to Iranians. We're not hearing what's going on, but they're talking. They don't want any more escalations in the region.
Correct. Yeah, no, I don't think the Saudis don't want it anymore. Qataris, Bahrainis, Kuwaitis, I think they've had enough. And so they're willing to have a deal with Iran. But, remember, Oman has just been a tool of Israel and the United States. And, they persist in trying to hurt Iran. I think Iran will hit them militarily. Shut down Fujairah.
You mean UAE?
I mean, UAE, you're right.
UAE, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh. Do you think that Donald Trump would let as it was mentioned by the Omani government, because whatever they're talking about is about a sort of coordination, regional coordination between, Iran and other countries, GCC countries. The main question is that acceptable for Washington? And how does Washington see the changes that are happening? On one hand, they want to put economic pressure on Iran. On the other hand, they see no capabilities in these countries to get along with that plan.
Well, they want to put economic pressure on Iran, but their entire concept of pressure is, hey, you got to be, if you're using the U.S. dollar, boy, we got you by the balls. The problem is, Iran stopped using the U.S. dollar. They're moved to the Chinese yuan. So they're coming in under, let's call it the new BRICS system. A system that will cater to the global south, a system that will, countries that trade under that with the Chinese yuan, they'll deal with their own currencies, and they won't have to go begging the United States for dollars. And so you got this flood of dollars out there and no demand for them. That's going to be a problem for Besant. And they still got this juggling act, thinking they can keep the yields down, try to keep the yields down, and they dropped today a little bit, but they're going to go back up because Besant, he does not have the power to control that. He's going to try, but he's going to fall short.
Larry, do you think that the administration is suffering from some sort of internal chaos, or is it something because of the situation with the midterm elections? You see, there is a lot going on in Washington that doesn't make sense, after all. The case of Canada, South Korea, the case of Iran, MOU signing, getting out of the MOU, tit for tat, and coming back, sending Asim Munir to Iran, basically asking Iran to come to the table. It's putting all these pictures.
If you're trying to discern a strategy, good luck. It's like watching. There's no real logic behind it, and there certainly is not a strategy, or at least a strategy that I would argue is a viable strategy. Basically boils down. Yeah, we're going to piss off all of our so-called allies, and then expect them to be willing to do us a favor. I don't think that's a very wise move. You're going to create. You're already creating with Canada. They said, okay, you're going to 50% tariff us. Back at you, dude. We're going to give you 50% tariffs. But now, losing 300,000 barrels of oil a day for September. That's going to hurt.
And they know the Prime Minister of Canada is so smart. His move was so smart. And he knows what he's doing.
Right.
And the other point is, it seems that the problem between the United States and Canada comes from the Lutnick, our Lutnick, and he wanted more from Canada. He said that we're not gonna give up on those, proposals. The United States is not gonna give up on those proposals. They're not gonna back down. That's why they made Canada this way, and then the Canada is not happy. It's just sitting back.
Yeah, well, it's it's a foolish, a foolish action. Now, right now, I double checked the figure. So the reduction of 300,000 barrels per day, that's almost 8% of Canada's total oil exports to the United States. So that's, you lose 8%. That's a significant amount. There's not, they can't turn to Mexico and say, hey, could you give us an additional 300,000 barrels per day? Mexico can, and they can't get it out of Venezuela. So, and this is going to have a direct impact. It's going to further drive the price of diesel up, and it's already been, like on the West Coast, up over 6%, up over $2 and 35 cents a gallon.
Today, did you see the article in Wall Street Journal talking about the war? It mentions the cases of the war since February 28. It says that everybody in the Trump administration, basically everybody, Tulsi Gabbard told Donald Trump, if you attack Iran, they're going to close the Strait of Hormuz. Our soldiers would be under threat, and they may kill our soldiers in the region. And the other point that she raised is that would hit the global energy market. And we're not going to have a way out of that conflict, that chaos that would bring, the war in Iran would bring. This is what Tulsi Gabbard said. And then you see the article mentions that J.D. Vance urged Donald Trump to find a diplomatic solution. General King told him there is no military solution for that. Don't go. But the only force to support Donald Trump in his decision to attack Iran was Benjamin Netanyahu and Israelis. They told him Iran is the most, Iran is so weak today that this is the best moment to attack them. So they convinced Donald Trump, and Donald Trump, after all, getting all this information, he decided to start the war.
Well, remember, Hegseth was all on board with it too.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just Trump. Hegseth, I don't know about Rubio. I've heard different reports. Some said he was supportive, some said he wasn't. But Trump's now got a mess on his hands, and they got to get out, and they can't get out militarily. So they're going to have to make some concessions to Iran, and Pakistan's trying to give them an off ramp. Declare victory, lift the blockade, claim that Iran is now willing to negotiate on enrichment of uranium, and get the oil flowing again. And even if let's say they do reach that agreement next week, you're still going to look at another month at least of shortage, and perhaps longer.
Yeah, you've mentioned Pete Hegseth. I remember when Donald Trump said, the first person in my administration who said ready to go to war was Pete Hegseth. Just looking at him, what are you talking about? It wasn't.
Yeah, well, blame him. That's all Hegseth's fault. Trump wanted to say, he'll fire Hegseth. Yeah, Hegseth got bad advice, so we got to go with he got us into this mess, so I'm going to get us out. And that's not true, but that's how it's going to be portrayed.
He's not going to. We know Donald Trump. He's not going to accept any sort of defeat. I don't. That's why I think the whole concept of economic war on Iran is based on that. Basically, saying that Iran is defeating. That's why they're changing their behavior. On one hand, negotiating, talking with Iranian, on the other hand, putting economic pressure on them. So if they're talking to us because we are putting pressure on them. But the problem, Larry, is how far is that going to go? I think the crucial question is this.
Yeah, go ahead.
I to be honest, I don't see they're getting along anytime soon. The two sides, the United States, even under the Trump administration, I don't see Donald Trump being able to do any of those paragraphs or implement any of those paragraphs of the MOU. Frozen assets, sanctions, nothing. Do you think that Israel today was attacking in the southern part of Lebanon, attacking Al-Mansuri, Ali Taher fortress, or that mountain in the southern Lebanon? Do you think Donald Trump would be able to force Benjamin Netanyahu to get out of Lebanon?
Well, he has the ability to do it, but will he exercise it? I don't think so. Look, one of the things, I asked you the question yesterday, was the economy better in Iran when you visited, back in January into early February compared to, say, 12 years ago? And you said there was no comparison. It was better. Now, what Besant and the West focus on is the raw GDP number that, if you look at it in strictly raw GDP terms, GDP now is in Iran is around 300 billion, and it's been falling. So it looks like, oh man, the economy's in free fall. However, there's this thing called purchasing power parity, PPP. And when you run the GDP numbers on that basis, well, in 2015, the GDP based on purchasing power parity in Iran was $1.4 trillion. Now, after 11 years later, after all the JCPOA era sanctions have been enforced, the purchasing power parity GDP of Iran is now 2.18 million. It almost doubled. So, which makes it, using IMF numbers, the 23rd largest economy in the world. So the notion that you're going to collapse the Iranian economy is just foolish.
Yeah. I think the best way to evaluate, assess an economy is the PPP, is PPP, purchasing power parity. And this is the best way. With the case of Russia, we had the same, if you remember. They said Russia is falling apart, Russia is just being collapsed and nothing is working, but you see their GDP at PPP is growing since the war started.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're using PPP numbers. Russia's the fourth largest economy in the world. It follows India, China, and the United States.
Yeah. There is a lot, Larry. There is a lot with the GDP. There is, they're considering many things that are not part, because there is a simple concept to understand the GDP. The United States producing? Because it's all about products. It's all about production. These are not, the GDP. They're the debt of those people, the credits and everything. The land. They're getting all of these items into the GDP, which doesn't make sense. It means your home is, much more expensive than mine. It means that it's part of the, U.S. GDP. It doesn't make sense after all, putting all these items together.
Yeah, my home, thanks in part to COVID and everything else, it's doubled in price over the last 7 years. So on paper, we're doing quite well. Again, the U.S. economy is very much a financialized economy. It's not based upon actually production of things that you can touch with your hands and use in your home or use in your manufacturing business. It's money for software and AI systems and things that may or may not have real value.
The other, Larry, news today was the head of C.I.A. is in Russia talking with the Russians.
Yeah,
What is that all about?
I have no idea. I suspect they sent Radcliffe instead of Kushner and Witkoff to have a serious talk about I think the CIA now recognizes Ukraine's in its end stage. It can't survive, and so I think Radcliffe is there to see if there is a off ramp to that war. I think he probably got a pretty chilly reception from the Russians. And it remains to be seen if he actually met with Putin. May have. And I think Putin laid it on the line that Russia's pissed off that the CIA tried to kill him, that the CIA continues to provide targeting data to Ukraine that's killing Russian civilians. And I think one of the issues that they discussed, the Ukrainians droned a children's home, for fuck's sake, and killed children. That's not a military target by any stretch. And you're going to see the Russians took a brief break, allowing Ukraine to celebrate its Independence Day without bombing the shit out of them in Kyiv. But I think that hiatus is over tonight now. We're going to resume.
Wall Street Journal reported that the head of CIA, John Ratcliffe, made a surprise visit to Moscow to convince President Putin not to declare mobilization against Ukraine. I don't know.
No, I mean, Putin's not looking to mobilize. They got enough troops. They're signing up enough. They don't need to mobilize. It's friggin' Ukraine that's talking about mobilizing women and 18-year-olds. It's not Russia.
Because it says NATO intelligence had also picked up signals that pointed towards a Russian plan to test NATO's resolve by carrying out limited incursions into Europe. Is it all made up, in your opinion? It seems.
What do you mean?
Russian incursion of Europe.
Yeah, well, Russia could do that under certain circumstances, but they're not preparing to do that. Again, that's just more Western propaganda.
Is it the moment for the United States to wrap up the case of Ukraine, Larry, in your opinion?
Yes. Time to put an end to this disaster.
Who's avoiding that?
Well, Ukraine. Ukraine has, they keep refusing the off ramps. And Russia just said, okay, fine. They've turned Ukraine into an island, and Ukraine's previous lifelines for supply coming into Odessa and the Black Sea are now dead, cut off. So what are they? What are they going to do?
It seems that Israel is not happy with Tom Barak because of his comments about unnecessary escalation when it comes to this Israeli attack on Abu al-Duhur in Syria. He said that, and Israel is not happy about it, but they say he's Trump's man, so we cannot change that reality.
Yeah.
Erdogan today doubled down as well. Where do you see? He said that Turkey is not going to back down with the case of Syria. They're going to support Syria. They're going to help them to improve their security, the stability in Syria. And it doesn't matter who's trying to avoid that. They're going to go against it, as long as it takes.
Yeah. Well, and in addition to that, Turkey also, I think, made it pretty clear that it's not going to separate itself from Iran either, because it depends upon the gas that Iran exports to Turkey, right?
It says Erdogan said that Turkey is aware of attempts by Israel to impose bloody scenarios on the region, and wow, that Ankara would not allow such plans to succeed. There is nothing good going on for Israel. I would.
Yeah, it's an astute observation. They got some problems, but it was, they're in the midst of an election season, and during election season, boy, people say and do crazy stuff.
Does the United States have the situation in Syria under the control?
The United States? No. I don't think they have any control. They've aligned themselves with a bona fide jihadist who has a track record of killing Shia, Alawites, and there's been no sign that he's, it'd be one thing if he suddenly turned into Abraham Lincoln and said, with malice towards none, with charity for all, and tried to bring the country together. He's not doing that. But, I don't see Turkey walking away from this. And mind you, I'm going to keep calling it Turkey until they start doing something to support the Palestinian people. As long as they keep shipping oil to Israel, they get to be Turkey. We don't get to be Turkey.
The United Kingdom, Larry, is trying to. It seems that the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is getting more radical. It's basically the same as it happened before with the case of Germany. After Olaf Scholz, you see Merz coming and everything getting more radical. And right now it's the same case with this guy, Burnham. And they call, he's talking about helping Ukraine and letting them, use long-range missiles. And where do you see the situation between the United Kingdom is so much involved in Ukraine, I would say more than the United States under the Trump administration.
Yeah, no, this goes back to the Cold War era. And remember the Brits facilitated the immigration, exfiltration, call it what you will, of the former Nazis, the Banderites, all the folks who collaborated with the Nazis. The UK ended up protecting them because they wanted to use them against the then Soviet Union.
Secretary Marco Rubio, he has told several foreign counterparts that for the time being, the United States does not plan to launch new strikes against Iran. It was reported in Axios. Larry. Instead, the Trump administration is focusing on the forms of pressure, including the naval blockade and the newly announced sanctions campaign. And Rubio said,
go ahead, sorry.
Rubio said that while Washington is not preparing for a return to a major combat operation, strikes could still be carried out if Iran attacks first.
Well, yeah, but let's throw another variable into the mix. If these reports are true that Iran has now made a decision to enrich at 90%, and then they withdraw from the NPT, the United States may decide that they need to attack nuclear sites in Iran, and then game on. So at a minimum, if those attacks are carried out with the assistance of any of the Gulf Arabs, they'll be targeted. And if the Gulf Arabs don't participate, I would think at a minimum, Iran would strike Israel. So it's still it can still get pretty ugly.
How about the timing of that?
What do you mean the timing?
The time, because the elections are going on in Israel, in the United States as well.
Well, the elections will go on in October, right?
Yeah, in 3 months.
So we'll see what happens between now and then.
What Larry Israel want in the southern part of Lebanon? They didn't stop for a single day, for a single moment. They're attacking over and over in the southern Lebanon, while they have that MOU, that so-called MOU with the government in Lebanon.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they want the territory. They argue that it's for a buffer zone, but it's not. It's part of their effort to get control of that territory from the river to the sea. That's what they're about. They claim that that's what Pakistan is doing, but I mean what the Hamas and Hezbollah want to do, but they themselves are the river to the sea people.
Who's the better mediator, for the best mediator for the case of Saudi Arabia and Yemen? Who can resolve that issue in the region? Is it Turkey? Is it Iran? Is it Pakistan?
I think it'd be Pakistan acting on behalf of the Chinese. So the Chinese are, they're playing an important role behind the scenes.
Because Pakistan doesn't seem to have a good relationship with the Yemenis, with Houthis, with Ansarullah, because they were always supporting Saudi Arabia.
Well, but they'll be working through Iran. But right now, the Houthis are still causing damage to Saudi Arabia, but nothing that's so damn damn harmful that they feel, oh, we got to get out from under this immediately.
I assume that the Strait of Hormuz would not be open while the war is going on in the southern Lebanon, and with the case of Yemen.
Well, that's what, again, Iran's position is, if you want to get back, if you want to reopen, if you want to get a settlement, the MOU is the foundation document. Fulfill your obligations under the MOU. Spelled out. They'll probably insist that you got to have definite relief in terms of unfreezing assets, not postpone it to some day off in the future. So we'll see. I think Pakistan's almost got a mission impossible here, because I think what Iran's demanding, I don't see the United States willing to comply. But we'll see. I could be pleasantly surprised.
Nobody knows what's going on, but I hope we're going to get good surprises. Let's assume that, because that means
Right.
the end of the war in the West Asia, the end in Yemen, the end in Lebanon. And the case of Lebanon is so similar to what we've seen since 2024. It was a ceasefire, but Israel, whenever they thought that they need to attack somewhere in the southern Lebanon, they attacked and they hit the target. And today is the same. Nothing has changed in Lebanon. And
Yeah, no, I mean, it's Lebanon remains, a very sore spot. I'm fascinated that Hezbollah has not been launching its attacks and gone on a new offensive. I don't know why. Are they worn out? What sort of weapons? Are they, holding their fire until such time as they believe they can really inflict some pain on Israel? We'll see.
Yeah. Let's see what would happen. We're going to talk about it. Larry, thank you. Thank you so much. Great pleasure as always.
We're doing this again tomorrow?
Tomorrow, same time.
Same time, same bat station. Yeah. All right, my friends. We'll see you tomorrow.
See you, Larry. See you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Six months ago, Donald Trump vowed a swift military victory over Iran. But the only thing Trump has delivered to the American people is $40 trillion in debt, 6.7% mortgage rates, and $5 diesel. And as this Financial Times article points out, the president's agenda is under strain as the Iran war pushes up prices and America's finances worsen. Now, don't worry, Donald Trump has a plan. And today, August 24th, he has announced his decision to launch the most crushing economic operation ever taken against any country, promising Americans this will be economic warfare and isolation on an unprecedented scale. But will this be the final chapter that ultimately brings the Iran war to an end, or will Trump once again taco out? Well, what if I told you that Trump's economic war against Iran has already failed before it even started? What if instead of making Iran weaker, Trump's economic sanctions have already begun to backfire against the only thing that both Democrats and Republicans care about, and that, of course, is the U.S. economy. But let's check in with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scotty Bessent, who I'm sure has a really good understanding of the global economy.
I'm confident that bonds will continue declining. We've got a spike in oil prices today that I don't really understand.
What was that, Mr. Bessent? You don't understand why oil prices continue to rise? Well, how about the fact that the Strait of Hormuz has been on lockdown for nearly 6 months? How about the U.S. Strategic Oil Reserve recording its lowest level since 1983? It doesn't take a genius to understand why the price of oil continues to rise, but this is where the fog of war comes in, and how propaganda works in the United States. Donald Trump posted this animation on his Truth Social account last week, claiming the Strait of Hormuz is now a United States territory. Trump then made a bold claim that 40 tankers carrying 16 million barrels of oil made it through the Strait of Hormuz via protected southern channel last week. Trump supporters instantly praised the president and used it as evidence that Iran is losing the war and that a great American victory is on the horizon. But here's the problem. All of this was a complete lie. Independent vessel data from Klepper, a leading firm whose job is to track all international tankers, accused the Trump administration of, quote, just pulling a number out of thin air. And the firm released this statement. The reality is that Iran has the leverage. Iran has the control. The only tankers that are really passing through the Strait of Hormuz are those that are operating through Iranian waters. Donald Trump thinks his economic sanctions against Iran is going to make a real difference, but there is one country that simply won't allow this to happen. China has emerged as the real winner of the Iran war, as countries around the world are abandoning Trump and the United States and shifting their alliance closer to Beijing. Don't forget, it was China's decision to stop importing oil last month that saved the global economy from crashing. And I'm going to reveal the exact connection between Iran and China and why Trump's economic war has already failed before it even started. But first, I want to thank our sponsor for enabling us to bring you this video. Sponsors are how we're able to do what we do, so thank you to Outskill. And if you don't know Outskill, helping you get smarter is literally what they do. And if you've ever felt behind and that you need to learn the latest AI tools to get ahead in this increasingly competitive job market, Outskill is offering its mastermind course this and every weekend, 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. 2 days, lots of practical knowledge, expert mentoring, and real-world tools. Outskill believes so much in this course that they are making it free to our viewers. Just use the link in the description to register. You'll learn how to build AI agents that plan, execute, and report for you, automate workflows that run while you sleep, connect tools like Sheets and Notion to create profitable systems, and you'll learn how to use AI to save hours every week. Look, I know AI is a sensitive topic. I've made many videos discussing the AI race between the US and China and what it means for the future of our world. There are a lot of companies in this field I would not partner with, but I partner with Outskill because it's a service by and for human beings who want to better learn how to live with it. It's why Outskill's courses have already been attended by more than 10 million people. Sign up now and you'll receive 3 free bonuses, including a full AI prompt library, a roadmap to monetize your skills, and a personalized AI toolkit builder. If you're interested, you can sign up for free using the link in the video description or willfully ignored. Essentially, what the U.S. Treasury Secretary was saying is that the U.S. will now target any country in the world that does business with Iran and hit them with additional sanctions. China is Iran's largest trading partner, accounting for 1/3 of Iran's non-oil foreign trade and serving as the primary destination for Iranian crude oil imports. And the United States knows that China is a lifeline for Iran. But the U.S. is now urging China to back its most crushing economic operation against Iran. Let's not forget we are talking about China, the very country the U.S. government has spent years trying to economically isolate, sanction, and contain. My friend and fellow YouTuber Daniel Dumbrill said it best. After years of trying to isolate China, they now want China's help isolating China's ally. The lack of self-awareness is almost impressive. But can the US actually get China to stop trading with Iran? Well, once again, let's check in with Scott Bessent and see how the plan's going.
Does it include China? Because that's the primary economic partner of Iran.
Again, many conversations are best to have in private.
Interesting. Many conversations are best to have in private. What a great way to deflect the question and admit that China wants absolutely nothing to do with joining the United States' economic warfare against Iran. Just listen to the panic in Bessent's voice as he tries to salvage this interview and save face in front of the reporter.
We are confident that everyone wants the strait reopened and for energy prices to come back down. And sir, keep in mind that the Chinese get 50%, 50, the other energy from inside, from the Gulf. So it would do them a big service to get with the program.
Now, of course, every country wants the Strait of Hormuz opened again, but whose fault is it that the strait was closed in the first place? The message coming from Bessent is, hey, China, 50% of your energy comes from the Gulf region, so it's in your best interest that the Strait of Hormuz opens. But Bessent is committing a rookie mistake and confusing crude oil imports with total national energy. Let's look at the actual math. Because China doesn't run on Middle Eastern oil. Over half the country is powered by domestic coal. And on top of that, Beijing has built the largest arsenal of solar, wind, and hydroelectric power on Earth. While it's true that China does import a lot of oil from the Gulf region, the Middle East supplies a mere 5.6% of China's total energy. So Bessent's statement that 50% of China's energy comes from the Gulf is completely inaccurate and explains why China does not have any urgency, or quite frankly, any interest to help the United States in its failed war in Iran. But to show you how desperate the US government is becoming in this war, just look at how Donald Trump lashed out against South Korea over its refusal to join the Iran war. Trump is literally going around the world trying to persuade American allies to join his war. But after every European leader rejected the invitation, Trump had to pivot to Asia and directly asked the South Korean president to join the United States. Here's the exact transcript from President Trump himself. I called the South Korean president and said, would you like to give us a little hand? We don't need help with Iran, but if you would like, give us a hand with Iran. He said, no thanks. And I said, wait a minute, we have 39,000 soldiers over there guarding you from Kim Jong-un, your next door neighbor, and you're not going to help us on a very easy military operation in Iran? That's strange. Once again, it's just remarkable that the President of the United States is this clueless about world affairs. And here's a better question to ask. If this were truly an easy military operation, as Trump calls it, then why hasn't the United States been able to reopen the Strait of Hormuz after 6 months of conflict? After South Korea rejected Trump's invitation to join an act of war, Trump threatened the South Korean president and said he would cancel joint military drills that South Korea and America have been conducting annually since 1954. And this is how Trump treats America's closest allies in 2026. Make threats, and if you don't agree, then double down and make even more outrageous threats that will ultimately ruin the entire relationship. This is why China is winning in 2026, and why more countries around the world now have a more favorable view of China than the United States. But to really drive this point home and show you why Donald Trump's economic warfare against Iran will ultimately fail, we simply need to look at another fascinating case study, and that is the country of Canada. The United States and Canada share the longest international border in the world and have been close friends, trading partners, and allies for more than a century. The US and Canada are more than neighbors. They're family. But even Trump has managed to completely ruin this relationship. Just listen to Canada's Mark Carney address the media and acknowledge that Canada has rejected Trump's trade deal and will now charge reciprocal tariffs against the Americans.
I warned that America is trying to break us so they can own us. And I promise that that will never, ever happen. And while we believed earlier this week that we were moving towards a mutually beneficial agreement, in recent days, the United States proposed new terms that were uneconomic, unfair, and undermined the net benefits for Canada and called into question the reliability of any deal. We take this step confident that it is in the best interest of Canada, and that by rejecting a bad deal, by standing up for Canada, by focusing on what we can control, we will build Canada strong for all.
There is actually a verse in the Bible that reminds me so much of Donald Trump's economic warfare, and it's Proverbs 26:11, which states, "As a dog returns to his vomit, so a fool repeats his foolishness." And this is probably the most accurate representation of the Trump administration. For more context, just listen to the Premier of British Columbia, who states very bluntly what the future of the United States will be.
A way to embolden a bully is to capitulate. And I don't think we should embolden Mr. Trump, who clearly is a bully. Approach of the U.S. administration has been predictable in a sense that they are continually trying to find creative ways to try to attack Canada's economy. There's no question about that. The Canadian strength has that we have been very clear. The Prime Minister's been very clear. He's had my full support in this, that no deal is better than a bad deal with the Americans. We should not, out of a sense of desperation or anxiety or what's going to come next, bow down to this president's attempt to put pressure on Canadians. I feel sorry for Americans. If you can't be friends with Canada, then you almost certainly do not have a friend anywhere in the world. And that is a very lonely place to be.
After listening to these two Canadian politicians' speeches, something becomes remarkably clear. Do you notice the similarities between both Iran and Canada's position? Both countries are facing economic warfare from the United States. Both countries have accused the U.S. administration of dishonest negotiations, and both countries have risen up and become stronger, realizing that no deal is better than a bad deal with the Americans. Make no mistake, the Canadians will suffer economically by standing up to Donald Trump and his bullying tactics. The path of least resistance for Canada would be to shut up, take the deal Trump offers them, and don't fight back. But this would make Canada a vassal of the United States and go against everything it stands for in being Canadian. And Iran finds itself in the exact same position. The Iranian economy is hurting. The currency has been devastated, but whatever economic sanctions the United States unleashes against Iran, it will not matter. Iran has been sanctioned by the US government for 47 years, and it has not stopped the Iranian pursuit of freedom. So what makes anyone believe that this time will be different? The Iranians are fighting for their survival, and nothing is more important to them than retaining their sovereignty. Before February 27th, the Iranians never planned to control the Strait of Hormuz. But after February 28th, there will never be another day where the Iranians will give up control of the strait. Donald Trump's decision to attack Iran will go down as the largest geopolitical mistake ever made in United States history. And unless Trump retreats now and pulls U.S. forces out of the Middle East completely, this failed war will be the main issue during this year's midterm elections and will ultimately cost Trump his entire political career. The majority of countries around the world are supporting Iran, not the United States in this conflict. The majority of the world has realized that China is the more balanced, rational, and consistent superpower, and it's why the entire global south is rising and shifting closer to China. Just like the British Columbia premier said, if the United States can't be friends with Canada, then you don't have a friend anywhere in the world. And that is a lonely place to be. Everyone, thank you for making it to this point of the video. And once again, thank you to Outskill for sponsoring today's important message. If you want access to the best AI training course for free, simply click the link.
Tonight, China has delivered a massive blow to Washington as it firmly rejected Donald Trump's aggressive new oil blockade against Iran and issued a warning to the delusional fool from the White House. This comes just 24 hours after US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent threatened global superpowers with severe consequences if they defied American orders. Meanwhile, devastating updates continue from Gaza, where Israeli terrorists have murdered innocent Palestinians before targeting a UN facility in the occupied Palestinian territory, triggering fierce condemnation from the world body. In a stunning political twist, Israeli stooge and genocide supporter Hillary Clinton has registered her outrage against war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu, but not for committing a Holocaust. She is upset because Netanyahu's action, according to her, has led to the destruction of Israel's global image. This will be the broad focus of my video tonight. Also in this video, we look at Australia, where a Green Party senator has forcefully pushed back against the country's rogue Zionist body after its self-proclaimed chief demanded he retract his explosive comments exposing the influence of the Israeli lobby over the Australian government. So please stay tuned. Today we witness the exact moment a superpower's illusion of absolute control shattered at the global stage. Yesterday, if you remember, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent took to the podium to announce Operation Economic Outcast, what he called the single greatest financial offensive in history. The decree from the Trump administration was clear: stop buying oil from Iran, or the United States will use secondary sanctions to completely isolate you from the global dollar system. It was a classic old-school American playbook of economic coercion. But less than 24 hours later, China delivered a staggering public rebuke that should put an end to Washington's illusions once and for all. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian fired back in no uncertain terms. Beijing didn't just reject the measures, they explicitly condemned them as illegal unilateral sanctions that completely lack a basis in international law. China's Commerce Ministry went even further, invoking its blocking statute to order Chinese refineries to flat out ignore the US restrictions. The message from Beijing to the Trump administration is clear: stop living in the past.
China has made clear on many occasions its firm opposition to illicit unilateral sanctions that have no basis in international law or the authorization of UN Security Council. Economic wars and maximum pressure are not the solution. On the contrary, they will only lead to escalation and risk spillover, which will disrupt the global economic and financial order and harm the legitimate interests of other countries. The pressing task is to facilitate de-escalation of the situation and return to dialogue and negotiation as soon as possible. China will take all necessary measures to firmly safeguard its rights and interests. China's cooperation with Iran is conducted within the framework of international law and should not be disrupted. China is closely following the developments and will take all necessary measures to firmly safeguard its rights and interests.
AI is moving incredibly fast, and every week there is a new model or new tool being released. The hard part isn't really finding AI anymore, it's knowing what's worth using and how to actually use it productively in your work and everyday life. And I'll be honest, even for me, figuring all of this out can be a lot and pretty overwhelming. So when Outskill reached out and I learned more about what they were doing, I thought it was worth sharing with you guys. They have already helped more than 10 million learners across the world in 100 plus countries understand how to actually work with these tools. And this weekend, they're hosting a free live 2-day AI mastermind running from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. EST. The goal is to condense the experience of more than 100 AI practitioners, including specialists who have worked at companies like Google, Microsoft, and NVIDIA, into a focused 2-day learning event. Now I know there are loads of AI courses out there, but the focus here is different. Instead, the goal is to help you become AI independent, understand the rapid changes happening in the AI space, and ultimately increase your earning potential by applying these tools in real workflows. During the sessions, they cover everything from building and deploying AI agents that can plan, execute, and report tasks to automating workflows that keep running while you sleep, connecting tools like Google Sheets, Notion, and other apps into real systems, and using AI to save hours of work every week. On top of that, if you sign up today, you will also unlock over $5,000 worth of free bonuses, including an AI prompt Bible, a personalized AI toolkit builder, and a complete AI prompt library. Financial alternatives, diversifying their systems, and realizing they no longer have to bow to threats. The hard truth that the establishment in Washington refuses to face is that the US is no longer the only serious player on the board. So it is time for them to stop behaving like one. Meanwhile, the best that the deranged occupant of the White House could come up with was his delusional claim that he had freed the state of Hormuz from mines. No wonder Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf mocked Trump by calling his economic D-Day announcement a clown day. He wrote on Twitter, and I quote, "Him, economic D-Day. Also him, 5 seconds later, lol, why would I want to blow up the global financial system? Sir, this isn't Normandy. This is improv night and you forgot your own script. Clown day." End quote. Even American media outlets are now agreeing with the global perception that Trump has conceded defeat against Iran. Listen to Robert Kagan on CNN, a leading writer for the Atlantic website.
What is the plan? I mean, we've been building up to this economic D-Day announcement, and the announcement turns out to be more warnings about stuff that we may do to unnamed countries in the future. And so, as you rightly point out, there isn't much left to do other than prevent countries from doing any business at all with Iran. And the number one country that we would be talking about in this situation is China. And Trump has a meeting coming up with Xi Jinping. And I think that's why Secretary Treasury Bessent did not mention any names, because he didn't want to mention China. And it remains to be seen whether the administration is willing to be tough on China, because Trump was not tough on China when he visited Xi Jinping.
Well, right. I mean, also, it's, the whole idea of we're not going to trade with you if you trade with them, it just can't add up when it comes to China, right? That's the situation of the leverage, the trade relationship, but just to be blunt. And Iran is pushing back already, right? The deputy foreign minister calling out the threat, saying it doesn't add up, if Iran's capabilities have been destroyed and dismantled. And you write, because of this war, quote, "the dominant power in the region going forward will be Iran, not the United States or Israel's. For years, The world has been dealing with an Iran constrained. It will now discover what Iran unleashed looks like. I mean, Robert, look, that's a stunning thing to say. You look at this over an entire career, but to think that the decisions made in the past few months could lead you to say from the U.S. And Israel being the power players in the region to now it being Iran, that is a pretty stunning thing to say. What leads you to say it now?
Well, and you're right. I mean, it is probably the greatest strategic defeat the United States has suffered since World War II. So, I do think that's why I wrote this, because I do think it's important for people to understand just how much we have lost here. Look, the story was that Iran always had to worry, even though it was somewhat aggressive at many times, but it always had to worry that the United States would come in and launch a sort of devastating attack. Well, now that the United States has launched an attack that was meant to be devastating, and Iran has survived, and now the United States is out of all kinds of munitions, missiles, and defense interceptors, the Iranians know that really the United States does not have a military option right now. And that is the reason why the Trump administration is now trumpeting their economic sanctions. But that's a major retreat, and the Iranians understand it.
And yet, Iranian professor Syed Mohammad Marandi warns that US allies in the Arab world are no longer safe in the event of any future military transgressions by Trump.
If the United States attacks us, we will harm them. All those countries that assisted the United States in this war, such as Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Jordan, and the Israeli regime, all of them, they are fair game. And if the United States attacks us, we will harm them, the United States and its allies that have murdered our children. And any country that cooperates with the United States, they'll be seen as an enemy of the Iranian people, because this is a war to strangle women and children. We've already seen US senators go on TV, gloat and say Iranians don't have food. That's how disgusting the West is.
Okay. Elsewhere in Gaza, Israeli terrorists have continued to murder innocent Palestinians. They massacred 3 more Palestinians today, after killing 4 yesterday, before attacking the training facilities of UN body UNRWA. Yes, UN body. This is the sheer brazenness of these barbarians. They are openly destroying every single UN facility with impunity. As expected, the UN reacted furiously. That's all this disgraceful body is capable of doing these days.
Journalists covering affected by the tear gas. And earlier, troops raised the Israeli flag in the courtyard of that UNRWA training center. Israeli forces had also closed the Kalandia checkpoint, cutting off access to that area. The Palestinian presidency called on the UN Security Council to convene an urgent meeting in response to this raid. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Jordan, and Hamas have also condemned these Israeli actions. Now, the UN Secretary General, he condemned the Israeli attack. His spokesperson said about 20 UNRWA staff had to flee.
The Secretary General condemns in the strongest terms today's action by the Israeli authorities, including its security forces, to unlawfully enter and remain in the UNRWA Kalandia Training Center in occupied East Jerusalem, and to carry out unauthorized works on those premises. The Secretary General is greatly alarmed by this development, as it will deprive young people of the vocational education they were receiving. For over 70 years, the center has supported thousands of Palestine refugees through vocational education and a pathway to work. Today's actions are the 5th instance of unauthorized entry by Israeli authorities in the center since May this year, and follow other unacceptable breaches of inviolability and of interference with UNRWA premises in occupied East Jerusalem.
Now I want you to listen closely to what Israeli stooge Hillary Clinton is actually saying about Gaza, because it exposes the entire rot at the heart of the American political establishment.
But there is there should
geopolitical trends where truth matters. 60 years ago, an American general said he would bomb a country back to the Stone Age. A few weeks ago, the President of the United States said almost exactly the same thing about a different country this time around, but in almost the same words. That's not a coincidence. I'm reading into it. Major outlets, media that is, have already drawn this exact line themselves. For example, Gulf News traced Trump's Stone Age threat to Iran directly back to Curtis LeMay and Vietnam, and through described also the language as invoking Vietnam War era rhetoric explicitly. In my years of experience working in security issues from inside Washington, I have learned to take historical echoes like this seriously, not as some sort of a poetry, but as genuine signal about how a war is likely to unfold. So in this brief analysis, I want to walk you through different structural parallels between Vietnam and the 2026 Iran war, point by point, providing you the documentation and the sourcing so you can check every claim yourself. Number one, misjudged speed and quagmire dynamics. This is very important to understand. Why? Vietnam started on the assumption that American technological superiority would produce a vast, fast, decisive outcome, but it didn't. The Iran war opened the same way, just faster and more literally. On February 28, 2026, as you know, the US and Israel launched the joint decapitation strike, assassinating the late Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, and of course, dozens of senior officials in a single operation. Even Al Jazeera's reporting on the operation makes it clear the strike was built around the theory that removing leadership will break the Iranian government quickly. It was the wrong assumption on part of Washington. And that's not what happened, as you know. Instead, the war settled into exactly the kind of grinding attrition Vietnam became known for. It was reported in Washington that 10 straight nights of US bombing about Iran failed to break Iran's grip on the Strait of Hormuz, even as the conflict entered its sixth month mark. A fast war built on decapitation theory turned into now a long war anyway. That's the first parallel. And that sets up everything else. 2, flawed intelligence and justification. Another very important point. Vietnam escalated on the back of the 1964 Gulf of Tonkin incident, and naval engagements later shown to have been distorted by intelligence officers to justify a broader war. The Iran war's justification has followed a strikingly similar arc. The stated trigger was an imminent nuclear breakout. But look at what the actual monitoring bodies said before the war started. For example, the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, own May 2025 assessment stated it has no credible indication of an ongoing and declared structured nuclear program. End of quote. Even Armed Controls Association reported that IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi said directly on March 2nd, quote, "We don't see a structured program to manufacture nuclear weapons," end of quote, in Iran. So nuclear policy experts even went further. For example, Scientific American quoted non-proliferation expert Jeffrey Lewis, stating plainly, and I quote, "There was no evidence that Iran was close to a nuclear weapon," end of quote. I want to be precise here for a reason, because this isn't a claim that Iran's nuclear program didn't merit concerns. No, Iran did have a real concerning stockpile of about 60% of enriched uranium. And the IAEA had a genuine documented compliance, even though IAEA never acted fairly. But there is a real difference between a serious threshold capability that demands some sort of a tighter verification and an imminent weapon threat that justifies preemptive war. This is, again, where you have to understand different analysis make exactly that distinction. Genuinely, arguing the war was better understood as a discretionary escalation than, for example, a response to an imminent bomb. That gap, the stated justification, and what the monitoring agencies actually said is actually the same gap that defined Tonkin back in the 60s. 3, reliance on firepower over political strategy. Once again, another key point here. This is the parallel, in my opinion, with the clearest paper trail. Why? Because the language is nearly identical across 60 years. Go back to 1965, because in 1965, Air Force General Curtis LeMay threatened to bomb North Vietnam back to the Stone Age. Back to April 2026, in primetime address, Donald Trump said almost the same words about Iran. Quote, "We are going to bring them back to the Stone Age where they belong," end of quote. Even Al Jazeera Network own retrospective on this exact phrase traces the Stone Age line through decades of American war rhetoric, with Vietnam as the clearest precedent. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth then amplified the same phrase publicly. And that's where you have legal experts writing in a joint letter called the rhetoric and conduct of the campaign a potential violation of the United Nations Charter. If the truth matters to you, hit like, subscribe, and tap that bell. No spin, no agenda, just the stories they don't want you to know. Don't watch from the sideline. Be part of the movement. Your support keeps the truth alive. Thank you. The key here, the deeper parallel, isn't the phrase itself. No, it's what it represents. Overwhelming firepower deployed as a substitute for coherent political endgame and or a strategy. Vietnam proved that massive aerial destructions doesn't automatically convert into a political compliance, because now, 6 or 7 months into this Iran war, with Hormuz Strait still under firm control of Iran, and still the Iranian government still standing after its own supreme leader was killed, the same lesson is repeating in real time. 4, fierce nationalism and the unintended unity. This one is a big one. Here is where the Iran war's outcome may be running directly counter to what its planners in Washington expected. And it's the parallel that gets talked about least. Here is my opinion on it. The theory behind the Khamenei decapitation strike was that removing the spiritual supreme leader would automatically trigger internal collapse, or at a minimum, open space for an uprising. Exiled opposition figure Reza Pahlavi, the eldest son of Muhammad Reza Pahlavi, the last Shah of Iran, publicly urged Iranians to prepare to resume protests as the government collapses. But it didn't. The Iranian government is still standing. And that's not what the available evidence shows happening. On the very day of the strike, Times coverage of global reaction included images of Iran protesters not celebrating, but demonstrating against the United States and Israel attacks in Tehran. Separate reportings described mourners waving Iranian national flags at demonstrations explicitly framed as being in support of the government against the strikes. Why is this important? Because this is the classic rally around the flag effect, and it's precisely what happened to American bombing strategy in Vietnam. Sustained external bombardment tends to consolidate nationalism sentiments around the existing government rather than fracture it. That's something Washington didn't think about, especially when the population reads the attack as a foreign power targeting the nations itself, not just its leadership. That doesn't mean there is no internal dissent in Iran. Let's just be clear about that. There clearly is. And it predates this war by many years. But specific bet that decapitation will produce a rapid collapse looks 6-7 months in like it badly misjudged how nationalism actually functions under external attack. The same misjudgments that shaped a decade of failed assumptions in Vietnam. 5, foreign backing from superpowers. Very interesting dynamics here. Think about it. North Vietnam survived a decade of American bombing, partly because it never had to fight alone. My reference is that the Soviets and the Chinese material supports kept Hanoi in the war for longer than purely domestic effort could have sustained. The same parallel in Iran's situation, because Iran's situations run on a strikingly similar structure, just with different mechanics. And this is where you track information of China and Russia's role in 2026 Iran war documents, both Moscow and Beijing issuing sustained diplomatic cover at the United Nations Security Council throughout the conflict, by the way. And that's politically. On the material side, a separate documentation specifically on China's involvement states that Chinese companies have provided dual-use technology, including missile parts and geospatial intelligence to Iran. Now, this was, by the way, serious enough that the US had to sanction Chinese firms over it. And the Washington Institute's tracking of Chinese and the Russian statements shows that governments actively working the diplomatic track on Iran's behalf since day one of the war. Even US Defense Secretary Hegseth has publicly confirmed that the Pentagon is actively working to counter this support. Good luck with that, Mr. Hegseth. Layer onto that Iran's own proxy networks, the Ansarullah, aka Houthis, and Hezbollah, which are, both of them, absorbing and redirecting pressure across multiple fronts simultaneously. And what do you get? You get a structural echo of exactly how North Vietnam used external backing plus its own asymmetric capacity to outlast a materially superior conventional force, the United States in this case. So what you have superpower backing. Doesn't have to mean troops on the ground, as some might have expected. No, in both wars, Vietnam and Iran, it meant the weaker side could sustain a war of attrition it couldn't have sustained alone, if we consider them as a weaker side, which in reality they weren't. 6, high demand cost and descent. Why is this important? Think about it. Vietnam's anti-war movements built gradually over years before it became the defining domestic story of the war. The Iran war compressed that same arc into weeks. When I looked into the tracking of domestic American reactions, I found that, for example, a CBS poll from March 22nd, 2026, just 3 weeks into the war, the findings that 92% of Americans believed it was important for the conflict to end as quickly as possible. A Reuters poll, also from roughly the same time frame, found that while 65% of respondents expected Trump to escalate to a larger scale, we're talking about ground war, only 7% actually supported that move. And on March 28, 2026, the same tracking describes what characterized as the largest civilian protests in American history, which occurring partly in a direct reaction to the Iran war, less than a month after the first strikes. Why is this important, you may ask? That speed matters. Vietnam's protest movements took years to reach mass scale. This one reached comparable intensity in under 1 month against war justified by a nuclear threat that the IAEA itself had already publicly downplayed before the first bomb fell. Combine that with the financial cost. Both wars, Vietnam and Iran, measured in the trillions, and you have the same basic pattern that eventually forced Washington's hand in Vietnam, a war that's expensive in dollars and casualties, justified on the grounds of public increasingly doesn't buy, producing a backlash on the timeline the war's planners in Washington clearly did not anticipate, let alone having the US government back then and now lying to the American people, because it lied the same way it did during the Vietnam War. Number 7, my last point here. What this actually tells us, literally, because you think about it in terms of a question. None of this parallels that I shared with you mean that history is repeating exactly. No. Wars never repeat exactly. And this one has real structural differences. From Vietnam, no draft, no mass ground deployment. Instead, what you have a drone and an airstrike-centered campaign instead of a decade of infantry war. But the deeper pattern, misjudged assumption about speed, contested intelligence justifications, firepower substituting for political strategy, nationalism, a hardening instead of fracturing. Then you have superpower backing, extending the weaker side, even though Iran is not weak. But they are that side endurance and domestic cost outpacing public tolerance. That pattern is showing up again on a compressed timeline. And the interesting thing is with the sourcing to prove it rather than just the vibes. It is my conclusion for you because I like to keep this short and concise. In my years working exactly this kind of regional security questions in Washington when I was there, this is the pattern I would want any organization tracking, for example, Gulf risks, to understand before the next phase of this war, not after it. That's the important thing. So if this is useful to your work, that's the kind of analysis I bring to advisory and speaking engagements outside this channel. As always, remember, geopolitics impact your daily life in more ways than one. My name is Dr. Dave WW3, and I will see you next time.
Yeah, of course, always. Oh, description. Trita, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, man, good. All right, so where are we?
I mean,
What do you
there's a
make of
word
what's
for it I
happening?
can't say on air, but yeah.
What can you say on air?
What I can say on air is that, look, I think it's becoming increasingly clear that this is not likely to have a huge bite on the Iranians. It will create problems. It will make cost greater in terms of additional sanctions. I'm not convinced, however, that it is designed to really bring down the regime or to force them to capitulate, even though that is the way it's being presented. I think there may be a calculation behind this in which this gives the impression that the edge is with the US, that the leverage is with the US, but the aim is to have a more stable situation with no further escalation or de-escalation up until the midterms. And then after the midterms, the situation may be different. But the idea that right now there will be something that is done that really will bite with the Iranians, I think the administration understands that will only cause the Iranians to counter-escalate. And that counter-escalation is likely going to be more problematic for the United States. Particularly mindful of the fact that the US view is, not the exaggerated view that you hear in the media, but the US view is that thanks to the use of VLCCs, these massive tankers that can take up to 2 million barrels of oil a day, you only need about 5 of them a day to be able to get half of the traffic of the Gulf of the Strait as it was pre-war. You take out the fact that the Chinese have already reduced 5 million barrels of consumption a day, and then you only have a delta of about 5, and most of that 5 is covered by oil going through the Saudi and the Emirati pipelines. I'm not saying that the administration truly believes that they're there yet, but they believe that they have a pathway to it that dramatically reduces the economic impact of the strait being closed. Under those circumstances, it does not make sense to do something that compels the Iranians to counter-escalate. Moreover, just setting that aside for a moment, to get that type of a bite, you're not going to get it unless you go after the Chinese. And I just don't see the administration really doing that. I mean, I think we talked about it before. The reason why oil never went up above 150, 200, is because the Chinese dramatically reduced their consumption. And they did so deliberately, not to help the US, not to screw over the Iranians, but because their interest, which is what they pursue, is to make sure that there wasn't any global economic recession. So they reduced their demand in order to keep oil prices down and make sure that the rest of the global economy didn't collapse. So if the US goes after the Chinese can do a tremendous amount to screw over Trump, particularly mindful of the fact that Xi is about to come over here for a visit. So I find it very unlikely that they're going to go after the Chinese, which then means that this is by design not really meant to really unsettle the apple cart, but I think to just get to a new status quo that keeps it this way up until the election. The question then is, what will the Iranians do? Because if they understand that this is just some sort of a temporary period and afterwards Trump may have greater maneuverability to do much more difficult things against Iran, I suspect that their calculation right now is they want to see if there's still a chance of getting Trump back into the MOU. As you heard, today the Iranians and the Omanis agreed on an arrangement for the Strait. And I think right now the momentum is with waiting and seeing if Trump is willing to come back in. If that doesn't happen, there's no reason for the Iranians to counter-escalate right now. They'll counter-escalate either if there is a real bite to these things, and we don't know that for some time. And secondly, if they realize that the trajectory is negative for Iran, and as a result, if this just continues for a long period of time, they will be in a worse situation. But even then, you don't do it now. You do it 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the midterms, right? Yeah. That's when the impact of an Iranian counter-escalation is the greatest. So the absence of a response right now, I don't think should be read into too much. I think if there will be a counter-escalation, the timing of it most likely would not be until a little bit later.
That's a good point. Unless they do it now. Okay, there's some updates here. Unless they do it now as a warning to the US, like some limited strike to make sure the US don't make the sanctions bite. Just an assumption. Yeah. But I like your thinking's better. That's why I said to Professor.
And the Iranians have been actually quite effective or astute in terms of calibrating how they respond. And sometimes it's gone too far, perhaps beyond what they themselves wanted to. But there's been plenty of options that they've done in which they can do something without necessarily causing a major escalation. And again, I'm not saying that they won't. I'm just saying there's circumstances under which they would, but even then the timing doesn't make sense for them to do it right away.
All right, so there's a few things just happened as you're speaking, and there's something that happened earlier today. So Asim Munir was in Iran, and according to Al Arabiya, he was there to make an offer from the Americans, where the Americans would lift sanctions, lift their blockade in return for Iran letting ships go through without a fee. So while these sanctions are happening, according to Al Arabiya, an offer is being made to the Iranians. Tasnim also reported that Asim Munir was there, the head of Pakistan, was in Iran to not to make threats, but to deliver a message in terms of negotiations. So it's kind of aligned with the Al Arabiya report. So that was earlier today. And there's also the news that the Omanis and the Iranians put out a joint statement saying they're close to a deal on the Strait of Hormuz, where reportedly, that wasn't in the statement, but reportedly Iran would, we've talked about it before, through the Irani corridor, ships would go in and Iran would charge a fee, and through the Omani corridor, Iran would not charge a fee. And while you're speaking, just something came in, I haven't read it yet. Oman's foreign minister, Badr Abu Saidi, said he hopes a temporary corridor through the Strait of Hormuz and practical arrangements to restore safe navigation will be announced soon. He added that the future management of the strait and a permanent solution will be addressed later under Article 5 of the Islamabad MOU. Oman also, is that saying they're going to be putting in a fee, I guess? Oman also plans to hold discussions with regional partners to promote peace, blah, 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 blah. And then the Iranian foreign minister just said on the discussions with Oman on TV just now, yes, look, first I should point out that the Strait of Hormuz has no more than 2 coastal countries, Iran and Oman. And the respected viewers are aware that prior to our recent wars, we had no problem in the Strait of Hormuz. Traffic was normal. Iran did not have a special focus on the Strait of Hormuz issues as it should have, and our focus was on other areas in strategic military and security discussions. But especially after the 40-day war, our attention was drawn to this issue. It is true that we have 2 coastal countries, but we are still in a state of war. Okay, he didn't give anything, so that was useless. But yeah, Asim Munir and the statement by Iran and Oman.
Okay, so first on what the Pakistanis said, there's been different reporting. My understanding is that there wasn't an offer to lift the blockade simultaneously, meaning that the American side wanted first measures by the Iranians in terms of opening the strait, and then later there would be a lifting of the blockade. So it's not that they're disagreeing on what needs to be done, there's a disagreement on the sequencing. And that the Iranians are rejecting the idea that they're going to give up their main leverage in return for delayed reciprocity by Trump, who they completely distrust. And the message back to the Pakistanis was on this issue. I nevertheless think that that is a resolvable issue. You can still, because it doesn't seem to me that the US side is saying that, you know, they first need to see a long period of time of implementation before they would lift the blockade. I think this mainly likely is that Trump want to be able to say the Iranians gave the first concession. This was something that in the JCPOA took a very long time, in which it was critical, and sequencing was being made, in which on most of the time the Iranians took the first step, but the reciprocal step was very fast done by the US side. So ultimately, it really didn't matter. It's just a prestige thing, essentially.
But
so I think that is, you don't trust Trump. I think that likely is manageable. And if you read carefully what the statement came from the Omani Foreign Ministry, essentially saying the Iranians and the Omanis have an agreement. That agreement now needs to be taken first to make sure that the regional states are okay with it, but what the Omanis have told me they don't foresee a problem there, is that it will be taken to Washington. And from what the Omanis told me, again, lifting of the blockade was in the second step. And I'm a little bit skeptical about that. Again, it's the sequencing problem is still there.
First step is Iran lifting their blockade first, you mean? And then
Exactly.
the Americans?
Yeah. Now, if the American demand is there has to be demining first, which I don't know how long that would take, but that is not an instantaneous thing, of course. I don't think this is going to work. But even if all of this is resolved, I think we still have a huge problem. Because imagine if the Iranians, the Omanis, and the American side come to an agreement, the rest of the GCC, there's going to be a lifting of the blockade, there's going to be an opening of the strait, whatever sequencing or minimal difference of time, all of that is resolved. I still don't see the Iranians lifting the strait unless Lebanon is included. Because otherwise, the Iranians are giving away their main leverage in order to get an MOU minus Lebanon. And I find that extremely unlikely. Yeah. So I think that part is still, to the best of my knowledge, unresolved, and the Omanis and others have not touched that at all. It's just been on the strait.
Just a heads up, Trita, just the tapping of the table.
Oh, sorry about that.
Loud on the mic. I know you're very angry, but it's okay. It's okay. We'll get out of this. How worried are you that will be the Trump? Because I was just speaking to Professor Pape, and he was talking about how historically it was a good discussion because he's given so many historical examples of where sanctions were like this. As soon as we started, I'm like, are you still worried about war? He's like, absolutely, because sanctions is probably the most obvious way to get fall into the escalation trap. He said, is sanctions number one, and number two is an air campaign. These are the two ways, the two typical ways most escalation traps unfold. That didn't sound good, but so let me just ask you a question: how likely?
I can't put a finger on it, but first of all, I think Bob is absolutely right on that. Of course, he's done the research, and there's also research done by others that is even more specific, that shows that contrary to the belief that sanctions is some sort of alternative to war, if you listen to Besant, he said that this economic warfare, as he called it, will make sure that we don't need to take kinetic action. So he really presented it as an alternative to it. And that's been a common view in Washington, in which you oftentimes got doves to agree to sanctions because they were like, well, at least it's not war. Research shows that it's the opposite. Sanctions tend to be a stepping stone towards war, precisely because of the escalation trap. Once you have imposed it, then the other side needs to reciprocate, and then it ends up becoming a cycle, and we're already in it. And particularly mindful of the fact that, at least publicly, the US side did not put forward any demands on the Iranians. Listen to what Besant said. Read his FT op-ed. There were no demands. They were just saying, we're going to do this to punish the Islamic Republic. They're evil. It was all of this neocon talk. And the impression that will leave Tehran with is that, okay, this is an aim for regime change. And there's no way that the Iranians were going to back off. They're going to just counter-escalate.
I was going to ask you this. That's what Pape said. And he said that it's clear for him this is regime change. And he referenced the quote by Besant. He said, he's telling Iranian soldiers to put their weapons down and reference the Berlin Wall. And Pape made the good point that soldiers, he's saying soldiers. So Besant said, soldiers, you guys are not going to get your paychecks. But if everyone will lose their paychecks before the soldiers lose their paychecks, they're probably the only ones that will get the paychecks. But do you know,
there was a running joke at the State Department during the Iraq War that said that the last chicken sandwich in Baghdad will be eaten by Saddam Hussein. You can sanction the country and starve the population. The last person who will feel that pain is Saddam Hussein himself. There's something wrong with my camera.
No, I know what happened. No, I know what happened. Exactly. See, you just do this. I was going to tell you. Yeah. So you think it is?
So I still think.
Objective?
Let me put it this way. I think right now, the signaling I'm picking up is that Trump just doesn't want to do diplomacy, and he wants this off of his table for now. He's tired of it, and as a result, as you know, he instructed that there cannot be any direct contacts between the U.S. and Iran side. I don't foresee that to continue for much longer. But bottom line is, when you don't put forward any demands and you do it this way, as Besant did, it's either regime change or you're just trying to play for time.
No, but
you're just trying to.
But there's no public demands. I'm sure there's a demand privately.
I don't know. Let me put it that way. I don't know. I think there's been a situation has been created in which the president just doesn't believe that the Iranians will agree to anything. So he's stopping putting forward demands, etc. Again, may change because nothing in this administration tends to last particularly long. And no policy seems to be lasting particularly long. And this is not even a policy, it's just a tactic. But I do think that we're in a situation in which the president is tired of this issue. And the options really were a debate between those who wanted military escalation and those who wanted economic escalation, economic warfare escalation. The diplomatic option was not really even in the debate this time around.
I want to ask you about the missile that was fired at the Emirates. I always like to ask you those conspiracy questions. But just before that, do you agree with me that if Iran accepts not to charge a fee in the Strait of Hormuz, or very minimal fee, or share the fee with the entire Gulf, concedes on the fees for the Strait of Hormuz in some way, Trump would just walk away and this is it? Would you agree that this is the core issue and it's not really regime?
No, I don't think it's the core issue. I don't think it is the core issue. I do think it's an important issue. I don't think it's a core issue. It's, the fee, again, I think we talked about, the fee is an indication of who controls the strait. And this is where I think the administration has ended up becoming quite fixated on, that they don't want to have an outcome of this that has the symbolism or the substance of Iranian control over the strait. And the fee is essentially a manifestation of that. So whether it's a nominal fee, very symbolic fee, etc., I don't think is going to make a difference. It's the fact that there is some sort of a fee. Now, if it is shared with the other countries in the region, but as you said, look what Arakchi said at the interview that you referenced. This is very critical for the Iranians. They really want to establish the idea that there's only two countries that control the strait. The only two countries that have territorial waters in the strait. There is no international waters in the strait. It's just two territorial waters meeting each other. That's the Iranian interpretation. That essentially makes the Persian Gulf a landlocked, and not a landlocked, but it essentially closes it off for the other GCC countries, which, they will never accept that. So if the Omanis end up sharing their share of the fees with the rest of the GCC, the Iranians have no problem with. But they're not going to divide the fees between 6 countries or 7 countries.
Yes.
So I mean, we're getting involved in all these kind of idiotic stuff.
That's so crazy.
But it's so much about the symbolism of who's actually in control. of the situation. So I can see the Iranians agreeing that, they take half of the share, and if Oman wants to share its share with the others, that's their thing. But not in a way in which it is objectively at the outset shared between them, because that would suggest that all of them are territorial water. All of them have territorial waters in the Strait.
So it's the symbolism that matters. It's not the fee. The fee matters not for the fee itself, but for the symbolism of it. The missile. I'll ask you directly. I won't tell you what I think and know. Did Iran fire that missile at the UAE? What message were they sending? And was that the reason the UAE suddenly cut all trade with Iran?
I don't know who fired that missile, if it was the Iranians or not. What I think is interesting is in most of these cases, this is not the same Iran as 8 years ago. There were those firings at Emirati ships, the firing at the Saudi oil fields, and all of it was done with the Iranians denying it and keeping their fingerprints off of it, and essentially having plausible deniability. Throughout most of this war, they've pursued the opposite approach. They wanted it to be known that it was them, and they took credit for it. This time, they're denying this one. I'm not saying that they haven't denied other things during this war that probably was done by them. So again, my point is, I don't know. But the idea that the firing of that missile suddenly brought the Emiratis to that position, I find that extremely difficult to believe. I think it's
days
also
before the sanctions.
Yes. Also, it's very important to understand. Before this war started in February, between the June war and February, the Iranians had already moved their paying mechanisms away from the UAE. Then, of course, there's other trade.
Hong Kong or Turkey?
No idea. I mean, they have made it extremely opaque in order to protect it.
When you invoice them, what bank do you put there?
I have no idea.
I had to make the joke.
So bottom line is, so when the Emiratis are coming and saying this, it doesn't seem to actually have much substance behind it, because the lion's share of the traffic financial traffic that was going through the Strait had already been dissolved and been moved elsewhere. Moreover, you want to talk about conspiracy theories, again, I don't have any evidence for it, but you've seen that royal airplanes, at least on 2 occasions now, have flown there, and rumors are flying around that would happen. And I have to say, I personally do find this one credible.
Me
the
too.
Emiratis paid off the Iranians billions of dollars.
Exactly.
Because
that's
it was nothing else explains why in the second round of this war, the Iranians didn't hit Emirates at all. Nothing else explains that.
It's not suddenly, unless it's 2 scenarios. They're sending in billions, or suddenly the Emirates has a nuke. I don't think the Emirates has a nuke. And the only other explanation I can think of is this.
And if it has a nuke, then it questions the first part of the question, which is, did the Iranians shoot that missile?
Exactly. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'm pretty confident that, and like from what I've been told, it's the Iranians fired that missile. I wasn't told why. I was trying to remember if I was told why. I don't know why. I don't know what happened behind the scenes. I would guess it's the Emiratis are the ones sneaking most of the VLCCs through the southern corridor. Remember the report that the Emiratis offered the Iraqis to also help them sneak out the ships. So I think it's the Emiratis that are, leading the campaign to get ships out of the Omani side.
Could be. I don't
so
know
the
if that
Iranians
is enough
sending
of
a
an
warning.
issue. Yeah, it could be. But the bottom line is, if they wanted to stop it, this is not how to do it. If they wanted to stop it, they would shoot at far more of them, not just a warning shot.
Is it possible that the claim by Axios that maybe the Iranians don't have the capacity? No. I don't think that's true, but okay.
I don't find that credible.
They can easily shoot the ships going through.
Look, there's a lot that is going on there that is not out there in the open. A lot of the oil that is coming out through that channel right now is Iranian oil. It is Iranian oil.
Through the Omani channel?
Yeah, through the southern channel. They're selling their own oil through that waterway because it is shipped to other countries that are then shipping it within the GCC. So you have a new balance that is, and incidentally,
Jesus Christ,
some of the firings against the ships have been on the ships that carries Iranian oil. So there's shots fired designed not to create too much of an escalation.
So the Emirates fired that missile at the Emirates then, based on this. This is
so shots are being fired to retain a certain level of tension, but not a real escalation, and not really stop this, because the Iranians need this as well, because of the blockade of the blockade. The blockade of the blockade has created a necessity for some traffic to go through the Southern Channel, also for the Iranians. I mean, this is
the
an
Iranians are
entanglement.
working with the Iranians to get the oil out so the Americans don't stop it. That is crazy.
It's bizarre. But look, at the same time, you do have scenarios, perhaps not as convoluted as this one, created in war zones. I mean, remember all the stories of how Chechen warriors, while they were fighting the Russians, were also making a lot of money by selling vodka to the Russian soldiers. So you have these things happening in a lot of these different war zones. This one is just particularly convoluted, I think.
Well, anything interesting on your Substack that I should be on the lookout for? You always put out these
Well, I had a piece just a couple of days ago on exactly this, on the VLCCs and what the calculation of the US side was, and why it suddenly, there's an exaggerated narrative out there in which they're saying, oh, we're getting 20 million barrels out, etc. I've seen no one being able to confirm that. But I do think that there is a combination of factors in which, thanks to a number of VLCCs, reduction of Chinese demand, the pipelines that go through Saudi and one of them that go through Emirates, there's been a bit of a balancing taking place that has put the United States in a situation in which it feels much more comfortable. If you take a look at gas prices in the US right now, it's pretty stable. It's much higher than it was before, but it's not fluctuating in the way that it was before. The problem that's going to come here, though, is more diesel, fertilizers, etc., because those are the things that are not being pushed out in the same volumes through the Southern Channel at this point, and that's going to have secondary and third-rate effects here in the US and elsewhere as well.
I agree. All right, man. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Bye. All right, guys.
Iraqi PM Ali Faleh Zaidi says international coalition forces will withdraw from Iraq on September 30th, marking a sovereignty milestone, describing the planned departure as the completion of the country's formal sovereignty over its territory. He made these remarks and he said that on September 30th, they will be withdrawing, and with this, Iraqis will declare the completion of their formal sovereignty entirely over their national territories. Iraq must not become a staging ground for inflicting harm on other countries, which is probably a direct dig at the United States and their attacks that they conducted from Iraqi skies. But that on its own, if it's happening or if it's going to happen in a complete manner, will be the end of it. And the main thing, by the way, if all of the forces will withdraw completely, they already withdrew from one of the biggest bases, Ain al-Assad, in the past year, alongside other bases too. They still control the most important thing in Iraq is the airspace. So the United States has full control over Iraqi airspace. No flights take place without American authorization, believe it or not. So it's not as if Iraq is a sovereign country. However, Iraq, or some voices in Iraq, have been speaking about disarming some of the armed resistance groups that have very close ties with Iran. But they don't have a very good argument. Firstly, because they have a very high popular support. Two, they proved that they can target the United States, and they have, and Israel too. And they had an argument, and that argument was, well, we don't have sovereignty. What do you mean? If we have a fully sovereign country, all of us will be part of the armed forces, and you will call it a day. However, the bigger issue here, the most important thing, is the fact that the United States is on a withdrawal spree from the region. And that is a strategic Iranian win. That's a strategic victory primarily due to Iran's resilience and steadfastness and handling the pressure for decades upon decades for its sovereignty, for its support for Palestine, for its support for the Palestinian people. And they ended up with all of the actions of the Palestinian resistance, the Lebanese, the Yemeni, the Iraqi resistance to Iran, by confronting the main force behind all of this, the United States empire, and defeating it in this manner, although the war really hasn't fully ended yet, will mark the complete end of the empire. All of these developments are to do with Gaza's genocide. Before that, the resistance operations against Israel, the Palestinian resistance, the genocide, everyone who participated, reaching towards Iran, and now all of this expulsion from the region. And all of that has a direct impact on none other than Israel. Israel is losing and has lost already a major chunk of its strategic depth in West Asia with the elimination of all of these American bases and early radar detection systems, whether in the US HQs in Bahrain or Kuwait or Qatar or other parts too. All of that impacts Israel's capability to have any sort of functioning defense against Iran. If the United States is continuing with this withdrawal, they withdrew from Syria, they're going to withdraw more from Iraq, and potentially not rebuild any of the bases that were destroyed in Saudi Arabia or Jordan or Kuwait or Bahrain. Iran had a surprise attack against American bases in Jordan when they realized that the United States was redeploying. And look how far west Iran is looking in West Asia. It's not that they're thinking only of their immediate proximity. No, they went all the way to target an American base in Jordan to make sure that the United States doesn't have protection there. They are unable to conduct and launch attacks from Jordan. And also, and that's very, very important, there would be no defense for Israel from Jordanian territories. So all of that development impacts Israel directly. Israel knows that. Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to portray an image of strength by having more aggression in Syria, in Gaza, in Lebanon. Now they're considering kites flying in Gaza as a threat. They said that anyone who releases a kite or a balloon will be considered a threat and will bomb them, meaning that the IDF is going to have operations against children officially now who fly kites and try and play. All of these things are signs of a declining nation, a declining state, moments before their eternal collapse. And the United States, despite all of these statements of aggression against Iran and the fact that they're going to have an economic D-Day and the worst in history, they realize very well, and their actions on the ground speak much louder than their words on social media.
Coffee. Follow me.